There are a few people at the ranch that really make this possible. So I'll always start by thanking our trustees and our donors who make the ranch possible. For those of you online that help us out and help support us, it is really a special, meaningful thing. Leah, who I think you can see up there in the corner, really coordinates all the speakers, helps make sure we have a great balance. So really appreciate your curating of these evenings, Leah. Thank you so much for that. And then Esther is over here. If I look over my corner, you can see I'm nervous. That's because Esther's over there making sure all the technology works and I'm doing my job properly. So really, Esther, Leah make this possible. And those of you who support the ranch make this possible. So thank you so much for all of that. We don't spend a lot of time doing intros and bios during this program. Really, the speakers go back to back. Their bios have been flashing on the screen for those of you who logged on a little earlier. If you're the type that likes to glance at their bio as they're speaking, pull up your email. You got that a little bit earlier today, and all the bios for each speaker are in that email in the order that they will be presenting. Our format is pretty simple, 15 slides, 15 seconds. Each speaker's name will come up on the screen. They'll have a brief moment to say who they are and maybe a sentence about their topic. When they say go, Esther hits start, and those slides automatically move every 15 seconds, no matter how slow or fast they talk. So one of the challenges and beauties of this format is it's going to move and it's going to keep moving. At the end of their talk, the next speaker's name will come up. They'll conclude, and that next speaker will get to introduce themselves, that sentence about their topic, and tell Esther again to hit start. So really excited to see all those move through. At the end of the program, I will pop back in and we will do some Q&A. That Q&A works through the Q&A function. If you're a new user, hover over the bottom of your screen over a little bit to the right. You will see an icon. If you click on that, you can type in questions. Those questions will come to me, and I will moderate and present them to the speakers. That helps us move a little bit quicker in that last program. But we'll probably only have time for a handful of questions. But a really great question is one that ties a comparison or a contrast or a link between some of the different presenters. So audience, I'm gonna challenge you as you listen to think about things that spark another thought, that bounce off another speaker. Get some questions in there and I will get them shared with the speakers at the end of the program. Really excited to get going. I think, Leah, are we all set up? Esther, can you pop up our first speaker? I believe that is Anina. Okay. Fantastic, here we go.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Anderson Ranch, for inviting me to participate in Think Thursday. Hello, everyone. My name is Anina Major, and I have participated in workshops at the ranch. Today, I will share with you images from my last exhibition titled No Vacancy in Paradise, which was at the Hudson D. Walker Gallery in Provincetown, Massachusetts. We can get started. The show title derives from the poem by Bahamian poet Patricia Gilton, Miraculous, in which the last stanza reads, "No, there's no vacancy in paradise. We're claiming all the rooms, willing only to lend space to those who take with due respect the role of gracious guest." As an artist, I'm motivated to investigate the relationship between self and place. How does the environment relate to their understanding of self? What are the cross-cultural narratives that surface during this investigation? In response to the architecture of this space, the exhibition includes 5 mixed media installations composed using salvaged wood from renovations on Cape Cod neighboring houses, shattered seashells, plants, video, and ceramic sculpture. Viewers are required to position themselves within the environment to truly experience the work. What does it mean to obstruct, then to reveal, to tower over or to crouch down, or to stand in an intimate enclosed space? This piece, titled Wayward, gestures to the other installations within the gallery. It adopts the composition of a wayfinding sign and reveals its towering stature once you walk into the greater gallery space. The plant that crowns upon the piece locates a source of light from one of the few windows in the gallery. To the back of the space, a digital window installation titled Fragments of Epic Memory plays a video piece that deconstructs the format of a 1980s commercial of the Bahamas to document the firsthand daily experience of life on the island. The video concludes with the departure from the island due to the arrival of Hurricane Dorian, illustrating how quickly things change, fracturing the concept of paradise with reality. This is a detail of the woven piece within that installation. This is another installation from whence we came, where a woven object rests upon a wooden crate from which it was removed. Inside the crate, a silent 2-channel video plays 2 women plaiting, one a novice and the other an expert. The rhythm of the 2 women continuously weaving performs in the same manner as a continuous ocean waves. Even though the women are in different locations, the act of weaving connects them. These last few images are details of a market stall constructed in the alcove of the gallery. The viewer must enter the space to experience the video Saturday afternoon, which adopts the narration of a 1950s commercial for the Bahamas and presents it with modern day footage to illustrate how language can be used to disenfranchise people. Very little distinction is made between the words used to describe the land, the people, and their wares. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
George, we can.
Okay, I'm George Peters, and I'm an artist, a sculptor, kite maker, working with air, wind, and outdoor art. I make works that might be considered outsider art. I like making and displaying the works outside, where everyone seems to be anyway as well. I did a couple of residencies at the Anderson Ranch and taught some kite making workshops. So you can probably start now. The installation works I've done involve an active participation with the environments they're sited in. These could be forest, park, river, or even a frozen lake. Some include sound elements and the movement of wind. First collaboration with my partner, Melanie Walker, was a group of house-based sculptures that were sited at the Museum of Outdoor Arts in Englewood, Colorado. I love that name of the museum. I first moved to Boulder in the early 80s. I had lived in Hawaii, and the winter snows inspired me to return to my childhood a bit. So I started playing in the snow and building snow sculptures in our front yard. There was always a lot of snow then. Each build would be a little bigger and more complex than the last. People who walked up our sidewalk loved them. Some were lit up at night, some appeared after big snows on the Boulder Mall. I continue using the yard space in front of our modest Victorian house. The winter landscape offered a clean white slate to play with. Missing colors of Hawaii, I started making my own snowflowers to cheer up the neighborhood. The check house. I decided last year to make our rather drab white home a little more interesting, so I started painting it gray and white checkerboard. I liked it, and so did Melanie. We added a roof garden and some strange Russian Orthodox spires seen here. Took about 3 months. We live in Mapleton Historic District, where the rules are fairly strict. Checked the rule book and it said no more than 2 main colors. This is our kitchen. The checkerboard started creeping inside. This white check pattern, because once you start doing a pattern painting, it can quickly turn into polka dots. Now the house sort of blends in with whatever we put in our front art yard. I like what the snow does with the installation works, creating its own kind of magic. Look at the tops of the pipes there. new snowfall is so amazing. For National Art Drive Day, we put out pretty much everything we had in our front yard. We lit it at night with glimmering spotlights. People walked by and drove during the nationwide art tour. The COVID home isolation gave us both a little more time to work on our artworks for our yard. People would stop by, and if we were on the porch, we'd yell, or they would yell, "Thank you, we love it." Sometimes our front yard was a show place and testing ground for wind sculpture experiments that allows a space to play with the winds and dream of other forms. We put up banners for our own made-up holidays. We don't do normal holiday decorations. They're too boring and predictable. Here's our butterfly wing flags made for an opera performance of Madame Butterfly. And I love watching fabric blow in the wind. My earliest memory is playing and laughing in billowing white sheets on clotheslines. I think I was about 3. These are some of our black and white banners. Oh, and did I tell you we make kites? We also travel all over the world to kite festivals, flying them. This year, they all got canceled, so we put up our own wind show in our front yard, our art gallery. And it just helps to put a little more joy in the world. Thank you very much.
Hey, everybody. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay, thanks. I'm Kyle. I've been in the Valley for a couple of years. I have a small mushroom farm that we're in the midst of growing, and a background in biology. I'm gonna tell you a little bit about how soil works. All right, go ahead. When we walk through a pristine forest or thriving garden, it's hard not to marvel at the vitality and beauty of plants. But at great expense to the health of the planet, our culture has belittled the microscopic heroes that make it all possible. When the very first plants made their earthly debut, fungi and bacteria had already invented the alchemy of unlocking nutrients from rock. Instead of reinventing the wheel, plants partnered with these early pioneers, trading sugars and carbs for minerals and water. Over 500 million years later, I think I'm missing a slide. These partnerships diverged into staggering intricacies. Elaine Ingham was the first to map out these relationships. Sadly, her discoveries threatened the moneyed interests of Big Ag, and she was initially ostracized by mainstream academia. She founded the Soil Food Web School to teach people how to restore indigenous microorganisms to soil by applying liquid compost. While it can take nature centuries to transform barren soil into a fertile woodland, these techniques allow it to be done in just a couple years. The process is guided by the microscope. By visually assessing the makeup of a sample, you can, with great accuracy, predict the health of plants. I'm going to introduce you to the key players of a healthy food web, and I'll tell you why it all matters later. Mycelium, it's everywhere, it's seldom seen. There can be hundreds of species in a pinch of soil, however, only a small fraction of them ever produce mushrooms. Fungi are master chemists, recyclers, and communicators. When they solve a problem, they rapidly convey the solution to other parts of their network. They work intimately with plants to understand and respond to their needs. Some even thread their way inside root cells to make trades in private. Bacteria are the most ancient of all life forms. They come in many shapes, sizes, and colors, reproduce rapidly, and play an integral role in decomposing and transforming matter. But they lack the networking abilities of fungi, so they're slower to learn. Gobbling up these bacteria are larger, single-celled organisms. Flagellates bumble through the soil with flailing tentacles, grabbing bits of food. Amoeba move as slow amorphous blobs, engulfing their prey. Nematodes measure just a fraction of a millimeter, but they're incredibly diverse. Some have ornate tongues for grazing bacteria. Some are colossal beasts that prey on other nematodes. Some have hollow spears that they use to slurp the juice from strands of fungi. But there are also fungi that prey upon nematodes by trapping them in snares. The point is, every time something eats something else, there are nutrients excreted as waste. And that is how plants get the food that they need. It turns out we've been doing everything wrong when it comes to soil. Pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, fertilizers, huge heavy vehicles, tilling. It all contributes to a brutal system of repression that deprives plants of their microbial support system. On the right is a dairy pasture that is managed with a full chemical regimen. It has only been grazed once and is yet to bounce back. On the left is a pasture whose biology has been restored. It's been grazed 6 times and it's still looking good. With a thriving microbiome, plants are delivered everything they need exactly when they need it. As a result, they grow jam-packed with nutrition. Water use is reduced. Weeds and pests are less problematic, and harvests are often twice as big. This will be a revolution of much more than just agriculture. Healthy plants feed half of the carbon dioxide they fix from the atmosphere to the soil food web below. So with an intact food web, this carbon is locked underground. There is data to show that globalized soil building efforts would not only halt, but reverse carbon dioxide emissions in a matter of years. So spread the word, stay engaged, and thank you.
Hey, how's it going? My name is David. I'm the Director of Culinary Arts and Operations here at Anderson Ranch. And today we're going to be talking about ramen. It's just definitely a passion of mine, and I love cooking it, eating it, and definitely love talking about it. So here we go. Ramen. So it's a very humble dish. It started off being a street food item, just like a lot of Eastern Asian cuisine. It started off as being, working man's food. Its origins being in China. It's eventually crossed over to Japan. Now, ramen is more than just noodles in a bowl of soup. There's all these components that really make up a bowl of ramen. And, all that kind of contributes to why ramen becomes so delicious to us. This is the beginnings of one of my soups. It's called tonkotsu. It's a pork bone based broth that emulsifies as it cooks and eventually gets creamier and creamier and turns that opaque white. Chashu is one of the components you see on top of ramen, and the importance of swirling it, like rolling it up like that, is just part tradition and part aesthetics. You see a lot of that whirlpool effect in a lot of Japanese aesthetics, and definitely in ramen itself. And again, here it is. Mise en place out. The cooks will always talk about the importance of mise en place as part of it, having everything in its place, and that is incredibly important for a ramen service as well. Here is a bowl that was inspired by a trip to Taiwan. It was basically a whole pork rib and a bowl of broth, and that egg, was something that definitely took a while to figure out as well. Here is something called tantan men. It's basically a spicy sesame broth that has become very popular. Has become its own category of ramen in Japan. And this was inspired by a Michelin spot. Again, that egg we were talking about earlier, to get that perfect texture, and even the cutting of it is important because you don't want to ruin the yolk. So you definitely want to use the wire instead of a knife to cut these eggs. Here's that spare rib ramen again from these underground events I put on every once in a while. And again, that milky broth, the composition, with the toppings, the aromatic oils, the broth itself. And again, that going back to stress the whole mise en place aspect of ramen. When you're slinging bowls, you're going fast. Ramen should be one of those things that you enjoy within 15 minutes, 20 minutes tops. And so the importance of having everything ready to go so that the dish goes out to the guests in a timely manner is incredibly important. Here we start building the bowl with the chashu. We got some wontons. And then, what is this? Oh, this is a dish from actually a trip to Japan, just one of the ones I saw there. And then I think the next one, yeah. So this is from Nakiru. It's a Michelin-starred restaurant in Japan, one of 2 in the entire world. And this is their tantan men, which is incredibly light, super impactful flavor, bold, and just absolutely delicious. So again, this is going back to from the video. You kind of see the composition of ramen and the importance of really balancing flavors, textures, color, and all of that to actually have the perfect bowl.
I'm Tina Ortman. I have been a professional upholsterer for about 26 years, and I know all kinds of ways to attach fabric and padding materials to wooden frames. And when I came up against a metal frame, I had to change all my ideas and come up with new techniques. I have taken classes at the Anderson Ranch, and I've taught upholstery classes there, and the Anderson Ranch was really instrumental in me going on the metal path. So you can start. So this was the first chair that I came up against with all metal frame. It was a Victorian chair. It's wrought iron, none of it is welded. And I learned as I excavated down through the layers that everything had to be hand sewn on. So from the foundation materials to the springs, I was lucky that this piece of caning was still intact from the original upholstery. And that's what it became at the end. I spent a lot of time with this chair, all the pleating and hand sewing, and it's actually become one of my favorite pieces that I've done. And then this chair we found at the Anderson Ranch. You might recognize the office there. Fabiano Serra came up with the idea of using bicycle inner tube tires. So I sewed those to the correct diameter and slipped them onto the frame. Here's another chair that I found at the ranch that was obviously deteriorating, but I really liked the shape of it. And the vinyl straps were unrepairable, so I painted it and made my own vinyl straps and sewed them to the correct dimensions, and then kind of corset stitched it up the back. And my intern at that time, Lou Fuller, turned the little walnut feet. I'm also a rug hooker, which is a traditional craft where you pull up strips of wool through a fabric. And another influence at the ranch, Alphonse Matea, he suggested that maybe you could pull these strips up through other materials. And so I got some expanded metal and did the sample and liked the fish scale part of it. And then I became interested in manipulating my own metal. So it was another class at the ranch with Vivian Beer. She helped me make this frame and taught me how to weld. I'll appreciate that forever. And I used the rug hooking technique with it as well, with this crushed velvet. The scale of the mesh was a little bit different, so I had to stuff the strips. Then I eventually took another class at the ranch, welding for artists, and started this chair, still using the expanded metal, and became interested in what a plasma cutter could do. And here I've made this shape, and am now I'm in a welding program here in Bozeman, and that's the chair that came out of that shape. I flame treated it and waxed it, and would like to make more of them now that I have the file that could cut out the metal shape. And there I am welding. I appreciate, I think it was George's polka dots. I love my helmet, although I feel kind of conspicuous in it in my class, because all the young men all have skulls on theirs. Thank you very much.
Hello. Am I on? You can hear me? Yes. My name is Fanshen. I actually, unfortunately, haven't been able to visit the ranch as a presenter or as to take classes, but my dear friend Billy Joe recommended me for this, and I'm so grateful, and I think you're there. So hi, Billy Joe. I am an actor and a playwright, a producer, and a development executive. So that means I kind of take stories from their seedling of an idea and get to see them all the way through until they're actually in a movie theater or on television. And I work at Pearl Street Films with Matt Damon and Ben Affleck, especially to help create stories that are more representative of what the world actually looks like. So I'm going to talk about narrative as resistance. I'm ready. So I have this storytelling mantra, which is truth, justice, and love. And this is what I take with me every time I go to evaluate a story, whether or not these elements are in the story, and therefore whether that story is going to have an impact. So when I talk about truth, a lot of people ask, well, whose truth? You know, what do you mean? And the answer is the non-dominant narrative. So the history, for example, that we haven't heard. What are those stories that we didn't get told? One example of a dominant narrative is, I don't see color when it comes to race, or, well, I'm just a human being. But the truth is, this is dominant, and we need to actually look at the other side of that. So for example, just because you identify just as a human being doesn't mean that's how other people see you or treat you, as you can see in this meme. So we've got the ways we identify, and we've got the ways that the world identify us. Another example of truth telling is intersecting identities. So it's important to think about not just our racial identity as an example, but also other things that make up who we are. I am a Black woman. Kimberly Crenshaw coined this term, and she says, because of their intersectional identity as women and people of color, the interests and experiences of women of color are frequently marginalized within both. And that happens a lot with all of our identities. Another example of a non-dominant narrative are the origins of whiteness. So I want to give you a story about the 1920s. So in the 1920s, you could not become a naturalized citizen in the United States unless you were white. So a Japanese man named Takao Ozawa lived here for 20 years and went to the Supreme Court and said, please give me my citizenship. The Supreme Court said, no, we're sorry. The scientists are very clear. You are not white. Bhagat Singh was watching this case very carefully because he was born in India, and he was born in a region where the scientists were saying that they actually are in fact are white. But this was 3 months later, and at that point the Supreme Court said, we're sorry, science is no longer relevant and you are not white. This is a story that too few people know, and so we have to start our stories with telling the truth, the non-dominant narratives, and then we go to justice. Once we tell those truths, we can actually see where we need to pursue justice and when we need to pursue justice. When we're looking at justice, we can look at our own personal lives, our personal relationships. We can look at our neighborhoods, who's working, who's cutting your grass, and who's just living their life, right? We look at our schools, our children's schools, our community, our state, our country, and world. That's where we pursue justice. And when we tell the truth and then pursue justice based on that, that's what love looks like. So it doesn't have to be a hug necessarily. It has to be telling the truth. It has to be pursuing justice. It's active. I love this quote by Cornel West, who says, never forget that justice is what love looks like in public. Make it active. Make your storytelling active so that there is an actual impact. So never forget that telling the truth and then seeking justice is what love looks like. And so if you want your stories to have an impact, you need these elements: truth and justice and love. Thank you.
Whitney, I think we need to unmute you.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
Excellent. We'll start your slides over. Thank you, Leah.
Okay. So I'm Whitney, and I'm a huge fan of the ranch. I want to thank you all for inviting me to come. I have the wonderful opportunity of going to the ranch every summer with 4 of my students from the Chicago High School for the Arts. We didn't get to go this summer because of the pandemic, but it's an experience that we all treasure, and I'm happy to be here in a different capacity today. I'm going to share with you a little bit about my social practice project called Outcry. You can start. Outcry is a social practice project that I embarked on the night of the Women's March in 2018. Since then, I've held over 75 Outcry Scream sessions with anywhere from 3 to 25 participants. To date, I've worked with over 375 women and continue to maintain a waiting list. For many years, I contemplated various visual strategies for addressing the issue of systemic silencing surrounding sexual assault, abuse, and violence that would be empowering, therapeutic, and even fun for the women involved. I finally landed on Outcry in response to the rise of an overtly racist and sexist predator to the highest office in the land. I hoped that the project would help to propel the Me Too movement forward by providing a space for those of us who identify as women to feel safe enough to practice speaking up and out for ourselves with the support of a strong community. I also hope to provide a space to be able to let out our anger and frustration in response to 45, Dr. Nassar, Kavanaugh, Weinstein, R. Kelly, and the countless other predators who have been celebrated and promoted despite the horrific acts they've perpetrated against women and children. As a photographer, I'm deeply aware of the power of representation. I intentionally create portraits of women that are counter to those made for the male gaze. My subjects are not smiling or looking pretty in any idealized way. Rather, they take up space and demand to be heard. The very act of engaging in Outcry is difficult, not only because the subject can be so painful or performing in front of others is anxiety producing, but because our society puts so much pressure on women to smile and look pretty that allowing oneself to be captured mid-scream can be extremely difficult. I intentionally bring women together who do not know one another and might not normally spend time together due to systemic issues that segregate society by race, age, ability, class, in hopes of building a stronger, more integrated community that bridges the deep divides between us that have only been exacerbated by 45. Each Outcry Scream session is a community building, consciousness raising gathering during which we get to know one another over snacks, laugh, and share stories about our experiences. Everything from outrage and disbelief surrounding the current administration to very personal stories of sexual violence. Then we practice screaming together and talk about the power of our voices and how they can save us and have saved us again and again. Each time Outcry travels to a new venue, I engage with the community there beforehand, holding scream sessions prior to the exhibition so that I can include the local participants' portraits in that iteration of Outcry. Last month, I traveled to Cincinnati for my first pandemic Outcry scream session. Leading up to it, I spent some time researching how to do it safely. Turns out, it requires all of us to be outside and to scream from about 27 feet away. The resulting images are quite different from the others in the series, as they're shot from a further distance with a different backdrop and the participants don clear masks. The photograph of the empty blue backdrop represents the absence of a woman, of which there were 8, who were unable to make it to the session because they had come in contact with someone who tested positive for COVID and had to quarantine. These photographs, along with 150 others, will be on view at the Wave Pool Gallery in Cincinnati, September through November 15th. When seen together, these powerful portraits become a monumental act of collective resistance that I'm thrilled to bring to Ohio, leading up to through this incredibly important election. Thank you.
Wow, really thrilled to go through that. It is such a challenge to watch. For those of you who have joined previous Thinker Thursdays, you will join me in appreciating the effort that goes into trying to bring all of your thoughts into that tight of a structure, keep that pace and keep moving. So really can't thank all of you enough for your efforts in doing that. a reminder both to the panelists, if you'd like to ask a question, or to anyone in the audience. If you hover over the bottom of the screen, you'll see that little Q&A function. Please enter some questions, and we will get some conversation going between the group. While I wait for some questions to pop in there, maybe I'll start with one. One that really popped in my head was between us hearing Tina talk about upholstery and really seeing kind of a found object and looking at it and learning within that metal structure, but then also starting to see other pieces and how that she was going to add her voice to those pieces. And it really brought to me a little bit watching David as he talked about building that ramen bowl and how he's seen other works and inspired by them, but also coming back and constructing his own. And so I'm kind of taken by the idea between the two of those. I'd be curious if either of you kind of had thoughts about a shift in your thinking between watching someone else and then starting to experiment on your own and then going back, because both of you in your works kind of drifted between those two things. So maybe David, I'll ask you to go first as you talk about both the inspiration and then the practice, and then Tina, I'll pop to you.
Sure. You know, when I first started doing ramen, it was very much so based on a preconceived notion of what it should look like. So, you know, as far as modern day social topics, you know, stereotypes and whatnot, applies to food as well. You know, it's what our impression of what our preconceived notions are. After seeing more and more varieties and understanding that ramen, very much like American barbecue, varies region to region, I started developing my own style and, you know, pulling away from notable chefs and notable shops to sort of enrich my own style and really develop my own voice when it comes to building out my bowl. So that's sort of the process I've been through the last, I would say, 3 years when it comes to, you know, my recipes.
Perfect. Could I, Tina, pass over? I'm curious, as you watched, you know, and took those other forms and then started looking at adding your own, how you saw that kind of inspiration between observation and practice and trying.
Really excited to see that one art form, the rug hooking, could be transferred somewhere that I completely didn't think about ever. And it was actually a piece that we found at the dump, at the Aspen dump. It was a lawn chair, and it had a woven rope all through it. And that's what initially Alphonse says, well, you could hook that. And the holes in the woven rope were like this big. And I'm just like, I could, I just have to change how I'm thinking about the material. And anyway, and I initially thought that I would be a furniture designer in wood, and wood is not my medium. It's, but metal is so malleable and you can do so many things with it. And so I really appreciate the ranch helping me move in that direction.
Fantastic. I've got the next one. I'm going to kind of pitch a bit to three of you, Whitney, George, and Anina. Really thinking about how your work is perceived by others. All of you are talked in different ways about how people respond. Some of the questions that have come in, for instance, to Whitney, were when you think about that construction of an image that isn't focused on a male interpretation, how do you find men responding to that? George, some of those questions bounced around, some ideas over that idea of both creating your home environment as an artwork, but also the amount of times you sort of referenced people's experience with that and coming by, and a little bit thinking about that bringing of the observer into your own space, your own work as an art. And then Anina, really looking in that same vein over being in a place where you're presenting that image of time and change that challenges people's idea of the islands and of paradise. So maybe I'll go back and jump to you, Whitney, but George and Nina, if you could both make some references to how you think about audience and how you interact with audience.
Thank you, Peter, and whoever asked the question. I think, you know, it's been really interesting to see how men respond to the Outcry project. I think there's varied responses. The first time that I showed it in a large group with like 200 portraits was at the DePaul Art Museum. And this guy walked into the opening and he said to me, "Is this for me? Is this work for me?" And I was like, "It's absolutely for you. You know, it's so important for you to hear this and think about it." And then another guy came in and talked to me and wanted his wife to come and be a part of it. But I have to say that as I post things on Instagram and I see, you know how you can watch like who's following you? I see the numbers of men go down the more I post and the numbers of women go up. So about 30% of the people who follow me are men and the rest are women. And so I've seen it go down the more it's happening.
All right, George, how is the men-women ratio as they drive by your place?
Oh, it's
You
about
can
even.
take that question
actually.
where you want to go, but I was transition there.
With the woman pulling her husband to see this wild, crazy house. But it's interesting to see, especially during COVID times, you know, where everybody's basically locked up and they can't, you know, we had a month or so when we were physically isolated from everybody and people started going nuts. So it kind of started right about then that I just decided, oh, let's just make our front yard something that's fun and changes people's minds around and as an adventure to come to and see. And in fact, just yesterday, a group of about 15 bicycle tourists came in Boulder and stopped in front of the house. I guess we're on the tourist route now. But I was also responding to Whitney's work with the portraits because I did a portrait workshop with Melanie. She's in the photography department at CU here in Boulder. And we were asked to do a refugee project with new citizens of the country, people who had left their own country and come. And so we were trying to think of something to do. So I decided to, as we were all introducing ourselves to each other in a big circle, I said, okay, I'm going to pass my camera around to everybody, and I want you to introduce yourself, tell a short story about, you know, how you came to this country, and then take a picture of the next person and pass the camera around. So the camera becomes the storyteller, in other words. And I finally got all the pictures back around toward me, and I looked at them, and they were just too boring. There's no emotion there. So I said, okay, everybody make a funny face, and we're going to do this one more time really fast. So got 12 pictures of everybody going, the funniest faces they could come up with, and perfect. And we made kites out of them, went to the park and flew our faces. We did. Melanie, you just said.
And Nina, could you, and how you interact with the audience and how people responded to your exhibition?
Yeah, I think for me, it was about making a full, like, immersive experience for audiences. My work, and I just have to like reference Fanshen, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but this idea of dominant narratives. I mean, I was born and raised in a dominant narrative that completely influences how, you know, you would interpret almost everything. And so my work kind of is chipping away at that dominant narrative, I would say, and trying to add layers to what one may already perceive as, you know, these places of paradise, and some of the challenges that comes along with this concept of everything being a type of euphoria. So it's really interesting because I don't know anyone who's not visited an island. So mostly I get people sharing their experiences of islands, and altering their sense of their participation in this kind of like fantasy. Yeah, that's usually what happens.
Well, Fanshen, I'm actually going to ask you if you would help me a little bit. I was quite taken by connections I saw between Kyle, whose photographs, by the way, are just absolutely beautiful of all the earth and ground, but that he was in a way telling the truth and telling the process behind how that nature works. And I was interested in sort of hearing your thoughts of the way he told that story, but then Kyle really also thinking, as Fanshen talked about, the narrative of storytelling and telling your own personal truth and that justice and how that tied to your work as well. So maybe I'll pass first to Fanshen and then to Kyle.
Yeah, I think everyone's presentation had really clear elements of truth telling, and I think that's very common with artists, is that we are pushing the non-dominant narrative. George, obviously in your house and with the regulations that you had, and kind of being a non-conformist in terms of how it looked, the story of Ramen and kind of the ways that a lot of us who just consume it quickly don't necessarily think about it. And definitely in the microorganisms, is that the right way to say it? Really thinking about, pieces of the earth and planet that are sustaining us that we don't know about. For everyone, what I always push is then for these larger issues of racism, as an example, and sexism, and dismantling the patriarchy, dismantling the ideology of white supremacy, for all of this work, all of you can address those things. I would say can and have a responsibility to address those things within the artistry that you're doing. So I'd love to hear, there's obviously environmental justice where you might be doing that. So I'd love to hear how that might be happening.
It's a super interesting connection. I kind of packed in way too much into my talk. Hindsight is 2020. But one thing I sort of grazed over, my teacher, Elaine Ingham, is, she started from traditional academia and ended up getting ostracized just due to her work threatening the power of big agriculture, which is, a huge industry. I think that just, it's proven that, without, if you don't give up and you can maintain the desire to keep telling that truth and pushing it through by your own means, people are going to listen. The land speaks for itself. Those photos speak for themselves. When you see the results of this work, it's obvious. And that's what I have to keep reminding myself, because, the industry have a grip on the institutions and have a ton of power to put out all this propaganda. So, it's reassuring to know that when farmers see that they can actually grow more and grow better food that has a higher value, it's going to speak for itself and catch right on.
Their own truth. I'm favoring through the Q&A that's coming in questions that kind of broadly connect across groups. But if I may, I'd love to toss out one that has come in that's really about the artistic and creative experience and in isolation. So I'm gonna try and quickly paraphrase two different people here, but do the artists feel that at this time of pandemic, is it allowing more room for sort of a non-dominant narrative or construction? Or, is this isolation turning people inward where they're thinking more isolated in their sort of view of a work? I'm not articulating that very well, so I might ask somebody to bail me out. But is the pandemic making you feel like it's easier to appreciate and communicate non-dominant narratives? Or are we feeling more, or is it creating more isolation? Kind of let people jump in. If your mic's undone, you got it. Fanshen.
Yeah, I'll certainly say with the protests across the country, around Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, and all of us being having to shelter in place and being confronted with the images that those of us who have grown up with it have always seen, but this larger swath of people were witnessing what the rest of us experience in our lives. And I think that those were these non-dominant narratives because, you know, some of us marginalized people were experiencing them, but now the larger group, and it was very hopeful. And then of course, working in Hollywood and seeing, at least so far, some performative responses, which is a start sometimes, is that you know, celebrities and organizations and businesses have to start by, you know, really saying Black Lives Matter out loud as an example, so then we can hold them accountable. I'm hopeful that given the pandemic that we are a little more able to focus on those kinds of things. I think the same thing is certainly now going to happen with education and watching who is going to continue to be able to be in a supported learning environment and who isn't, and we're all going to be watching it. So I think it's good.
Any of the other speakers want to comment on that?
I was just going to agree with Fanshen. I mean, we're living in revolutionary times right now, and the pandemic is allowing people to have more time to grapple with those things if they haven't had to grapple with them in their lives. And I think it's a really exciting moment in that regard. And I think lots of artists are responding to that, and people in general. I know I am, obviously.
So I'm trying to keep up. Suddenly there's a flood of questions that have come in, but I think this one's really focused a bit on the future of art, but I'm going to narrow it down because it specifically asks about what is the future of food going to be and what is our experience with food going to be in this sort of post-COVID period. So just curious if those of you who spoke about food, Kai, you can jump in on mushrooms. But a little bit where you see the COVID having impacted the way people are interacting or working or creating, experiencing food.
I think that with, you know, the way people enjoy food now, obviously like communal shared items such as like, you know, family style services, you know, even something as simple as a meat and cheese board that usually is, for me, a lot of fun to put together because it really allows me to sort of play with the visuals of, you know, the whole composition. But things like that are no longer really, safe really to put out. So you see a lot of almost, I don't know, there's almost seems like an isolating aspect of food service itself. But at the same time, restaurants are very much so a social experience. And so you see this hunger for not just the food itself, but the experience as a whole, which is really interesting. Now, other than that, I do see an appreciation, a newfound appreciation of diversity in food, in the sense that, you know, people that might have maybe take for granted, you know, the accessibility of certain things, now have a newfound appreciation of, you know, even just being able to obtain certain items. And then that kind of, at least for me, just talking to some farmer friends, you know, the sort of appreciation of fresh farm produce and items like that have definitely gone up as well. So that, I mean, I think that there's definitely a, you know, silver lining in it all, for sure.
Yeah, I think that we really have taken for granted the fact that we walk into the store and there's going to be, you know, a myriad of different options, and it's always fresh and inexpensive. And, you know, it was really a shock in the early days of the pandemic when people were hoarding and, you know, the shelves were going empty. And for some people, that did trigger them to think more seriously about local food production. Pitkin County, where we live, is actually making some big efforts in investing in farmers. They have all these open space lands. That's where I operate the mushroom farm from. And yeah, it's really cool to, I mean, hopefully we don't have something like this again, but you know, what if we do? It could be so much worse. It could maybe something other than a pandemic. And yeah, the more that we can focus inwards and use all the, maybe we could eliminate one of our 10 golf courses and grow some food on it, or all of the just barren hay fields that are not really being put to use. It's amazing. We're capable of growing so much more.
Tina, there were several people who put in messages around your work, sort of a movement from the upholstery into metal work. I wondered if we could get you to pop back on and talk a little bit about what are you thinking about next, and where do you find sort of excitement in those projects? Of both Jerry, Deb, Diane, a few people sent in messages around those topics of where are you going next with your work?
I will, the upholstery business pays the bills, so I will continue to do that. The metal, I would like to start producing that, the one chair that had the, that was bent into the shape that I flame treated. I would like to do both. I'm really lucky that I found a profession that I love, and I don't love it every day, but I'm glad to just keep learning each piece of traditional furniture that comes in. I usually learn something new, another way that another upholsterer before me handled some problems, so I can incorporate that into the next. I was Whitney. I was interested to see how some of the faces, even though they're screaming, they look like they're having so much fun. Like it's a joyful thing that they're doing.
Thank you.
I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I think that the sessions are a lot of fun. I mean, they can be really painful. Each one is different. It depends on the community and the group of women who come, what people want to share, what they're there for. Some people are just there to let it out, and people are there to connect. So there is a lot of fun that's had at those. So I appreciate that you recognize that.
I'd love to add to that too, Whitney, because I mean, I feel like it connects directly to the truth, justice, love piece, because that's what you're there for. You all are really being vulnerable and telling your truths. You are talking about how to kind of change things, but then that joy in their faces, especially with us having the context of what has gone on before you take these photographs, is the love. And it's really beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, as you were talking, Fanshen, I was like, oh, that's exactly what I'm going for. I love this. I loved your...
You and I, we gonna hang out. Yes.
Thank you.
While there are a number of questions we did not get to, our time is kind of ending up, and that's just seemed like such a great spot to end on. This is really all about getting to know a little bit of a deeper sense of each other, connecting, so hanging out. Please, if you didn't get your question answered, I apologize. Shoot them to us in an email and we'll get you connected with that speaker. And so we can make sure those conversations do get to continue. I wish you were all here on campus so we could have a glass of wine and keep talking, but grab a glass of wine and tell the person you can talk with back at home what you all have thought about and learned in this call today. So thank you very much. Again, thank you to Leah and Esther, who make these events really work out. Give me the privilege of popping on here and just saying hello and introducing people. It's a pleasure to work with such talented and driven people. And all of you, thank you for your connections to the ranch. If you haven't been here yet, we're gonna drag you out. David, who you got up there, you can wave to him, has been making phenomenal food. We have the cafe here on campus open to build some excitement and keep the campus activated. We installed 18 different outdoor sculptures. It's pretty cool, so come by and check that out. Stay well, stay safe, keep being creative. I wish you all well. Have a great night.
Thank you.